The first time I watched the new girl walk into our cafeteria, I looked away. That was the part one hated remembering most. Not the screaming that came later, not the video that spread before last period, not the disciplinary meeting where everyone pretended a cafeteria full of witnesses had somehow seen nothing clearly. It was that first moment, when she stood at the entrance holding her tray with both hands, scanning the room for one safe face, and I lowered my eyes because Sloane Mercer was watching. In my first life, I told myself I was being careful. I was a scholarship student at Briarfield College, a school where careful girls survived longer than brave ones. I told myself the new girl would find somewhere to sit. I told myself Sloane's group only teased people a little. I told myself silence was neutral. By lunch, the new girl was crying beside an overturned tray, while half the cafeteria laughed and the other half pretended to inspect their sandwiches. By the final bell, she had been accused of stealing meal vouchers from the student lunch fund. By the next week, her family withdrew her. And because I tried to speak up too late, after the video had already been cut and the story had already hardened, I became the jealous scholarship girl who created drama for attention. I lost my cafeteria job, then my bursary interview, then the teacher recommendation. I needed to leave that school behind. Years later, when I died in a tiny apartment above a closed bakery, I was still hearing the new girl's tray hit the floor. Then I opened my eyes at 7:42 on the same Monday morning, in the same homeroom, with Miss Caro writing, "Welcome our new student" on the board. The door opened. The new girl walked in again. This time, before Sloane could smile, before the room could sort her into prey, before my fear could lower my eyes, I stood up and said, "She can sit with me." My name was Clara Wynne, and Briarfield College had trained me to understand tables before I understood people. The front tables in the cafeteria belonged to old families and prefects. The middle tables belonged to athletes, performers, and students with enough confidence to make noise without consequence. The back wall belonged to scholarship students, transfer students, quiet students, and anyone who had cried in public more than once. The corner by the vending machines belonged to those who had been exiled socially, but not officially. Sloane Mercer ruled the long table beneath the skylight, the one everyone called the sun table because it looked bright from a distance and burned anyone who sat there without permission. She was not the loudest girl in our year. Loud girls got reported. Sloane was soft, polished, funny in a way that made teachers laugh before realizing someone had been cut. Her father owned half the shopping district near school. Her mother chaired the parent philanthropy board. Sloane ran the Lunch Angels Fund, a student charity that sold ribbons, collected donations, and supposedly paid for meal vouchers for students who forgot lunch money. In newsletters, she was compassion in a blazer. In the cafeteria, she was the reason half the grade checked their chairs before sitting. In my first life, she chose the new girl because new girls were perfect targets. No allies, no map, no history except whatever Sloane wrote first. And I let it happen because Sloane had once turned an entire table against me for bringing home-brand biscuits to a class party. I remembered the laughter. I remembered deciding never to be noticed at lunch again. That decision killed someone else's future before it damaged mine. Miss Caro placed one hand on the new girl's shoulder and introduced her as Nora Bell. In my first life, I never learned her middle name, her favorite subject, or the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous. I only learned, too late, that she had transferred after her father's redundancy forced the family to move into her aunt's flat, that Briarfield had accepted her on a partial hardship bursary, and that Sloane had discovered all of this before first bell through the admissions assistant's daughter. Now Nora stood at the front of room 3B in an oversized blazer, shoes polished but old, hair cut blunt at her chin, and eyes already searching for the safest wall. Sloane sat 2 rows ahead of me, turning in her seat with the same bright expression I remembered from the old timeline. "Nora can sit with us at lunch," she said sweetly, before Miss Caro even asked. The room relaxed. That was Sloane's power. She could make an execution sound like hospitality. In my first life, everyone thought how kind. Nora thought so too. She smiled in relief, and I looked away. Today I spoke first. "Actually," I said, my chair scraping loud enough to make everyone turn, "I already offered." Sloane's smile did not fall. It paused. A tiny, perfect pause. "That's sweet, Clara," she said. "But the welcome committee usually helps new students settle in." "Then you can welcome both of us," I replied. A few students made soft sounds, not laughter exactly, more like the room inhaling too fast. Sloane tilted her head. "Are you joining us at the sun table?" In my first life, that question would have made my stomach fold in half. Today, I looked at Nora and said, "No. We'll choose our own table." The first pattern disruption was not grand. It was just a seat. Nora sat beside me for homeroom, and that one small choice disturbed Briarfield's entire morning ecosystem. Sloane's friend Paige kept glancing back as if Nora might leak status onto me by proximity. Talia, another sun table girl, typed under her desk so quickly her nails clicked against the screen. By 8:15, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I had deleted in another life, but still remembered like a bruise. "Sloane. Cute move. Hope you know what you're doing." I did not reply. Another message arrived. "Don't make the new girl uncomfortable by dragging her into your issues." Then another. "Lunch will be embarrassing if you keep this up." In my first life, I would have replied with a paragraph explaining I had no issues, no bad intentions, no desire for conflict. This time, I screenshotted every message and placed my phone face down. Nora looked at me from the corner of her eye. "Is it always like this?" she whispered. I could have lied kindly. Instead, I gave her the mercy of accuracy. "Only when someone wants to own your first day." Her fingers tightened around her timetable. "Sloane, yes. But she seemed nice." That's how it starts. Nora swallowed. I saw fear move through her, and with it the possibility that she might pull away, choose the safer-looking predator over the strange girl warning her before first period. I did not blame her. In my first life, I would have done the same. So I softened my voice. "You don't have to trust me. Just don't be alone with anyone who insists they're helping you privately." That sentence was the kind I wished someone had handed me when I first entered Briarfield. By second period, Sloane changed tactics. She sent kindness instead of threats. A small envelope appeared on my desk during English, delivered by a Year 8 runner who looked terrified of refusing. Inside were 2 pale gold lunch vouchers from the Lunch Angels Fund and a sticky note written in Sloane's looping script, "For Nora, since new days are hard. Nos jam." Just support. In my first life, those same vouchers appeared later in Nora's bag, except the story became that she had stolen them from the fund box. I stared at the serial numbers printed in the corners. LA 1842 and LA 1843. My skin went cold. Numbers. In the old timeline, nobody traced the vouchers because everyone was too busy watching the edited video of Nora with the overturned tray. Mrs. Alvarez, the cafeteria manager, had said during the meeting, those vouchers should have been locked in the fund drawer, but Deputy Rusk answered, "The student leaders handle distribution," and that ended it. This time, I raised my hand and asked Miss Caro if I could go to the office for a welfare matter. She hesitated, then saw the envelope and nodded. Nora looked panicked. I slid my notebook toward her before leaving. On the page I had written "Stay in class. Don't accept food, envelopes, or help from anyone but staff." She read it, then gave the smallest nod. "Good. A new timeline needs tiny agreements before it can hold bigger truths." Mrs. Alvarez was in the cafeteria kitchen at 9:34, yelling at a supplier over a box of bruised pears. She was a compact woman with silver-streaked hair, black sneakers, and the terrifying efficiency of someone who had fed 700 teenagers daily without being worshipped as she deserved. In my first life, she tried to defend Nora after the accusation, but by then the vouchers had moved through too many hands and Sloane had already cried in front of the deputy principal. Today, when I walked through the side kitchen door holding the envelope, she frowned. "Students aren't allowed back here before recess." "I know. I need you to check these voucher numbers before lunch." Her frown deepened. "Why?" I placed the envelope on the stainless steel counter. "Because Sloane Mercer is going to use them to frame the new girl for stealing from your Lunch Angels drawer." Mrs. Alvarez stared at me for 3 silent seconds. Then she turned off the speakerphone on her supplier call and said, "Start again." So I did, carefully, without mentioning rebirth, death, or the years I spent replaying a cafeteria video that should never have existed. I told her Sloan had sent vouchers through another student. I told her Nora was new, vulnerable, and being steered toward the sun table. I told her I wanted the numbers logged as received before lunch, not after an accusation. Mrs. Alvarez picked up the vouchers, read the numbers, and went very still. These were signed out yesterday. By Sloan. By the Lunch Angels Committee. Who signed? She opened a locked drawer, pulled out a clipboard, and turned it toward me. There it was, S. Mercer. 10 vouchers signed out. Only 2 in my hand. She told me they were for emergency distribution, Mrs. Alvarez said. Her voice had gone flat. No student used them yesterday. Can you print the sign-out log? I can do better. She reached under the counter and took out a red stamp. I can mark every voucher issued from this kitchen after this moment. Anything unmarked floating around at lunch came from before, and I know exactly who signed it out. That was the second pattern disruption. The lunch fund learned to count itself before Sloan could count on its silence. Mrs. Alvarez stamped the 2 vouchers I brought, photocopied them, and called the deputy principal's office. I nearly stopped her because Deputy Rusk had failed me in the first life, but she did not call Rusk. She called Principal DeMoss directly. I have a pre-lunch welfare concern involving student fund materials, she said, in the same voice she used to reject bruised pears. And I want it witnessed before someone turns lunch into theater. Principal DeMoss was new in my first life, too new to challenge Sloan's family during the scandal. She signed the withdrawal paperwork with regret, but not courage. Today, maybe because the concern arrived before the cafeteria exploded, she came down herself at 10:05. She listened. She examined the log. She looked at my screenshots. Then she asked me the question adults always ask when a student sounds too prepared. Clara, why do you believe this will happen today? I looked through the cafeteria serving window at the empty tables waiting under fluorescent lights. The sun table gleamed beneath the skylight. In another life, Nora's tray would scatter there like evidence of belonging denied. Because the first lunch matters, I said. If Sloan controls where Nora sits today, she controls what people believe about her tomorrow. Principal DeMoss did not smile. Good. This was not a smiling answer. What do you plan to do? She asked. I swallowed. Sit with Nora. Publicly. At the table closest to the cameras and the lunch fund box. Mrs. Alvarez made a sound that might have been approval. Principal DeMoss nodded slowly. And I will watch from the staff table. Before lunch, I collected people. That sounds more confident than it felt. In truth, I approached them with my heart pounding and my mouth dry, one by one, in corridors where Sloan's girls were not listening. First was Kemi, who had stopped eating in the cafeteria after Sloan's group made jokes about her packed lunches smelling too cultural. Then Jessa, whose meal card had mysteriously been drained during Year 10 camp and who had been too embarrassed to report it because she was on partial lunch support. Then Theo, a quiet chess player who had been nicknamed Leftovers after accepting Lunch Angels vouchers during his father's unemployment. Then Priya, who still sat at the edge of the sun table because she feared exile more than insult. I did not ask them to fight. I did not ask them to make speeches. I said, Nora Bell is new. Sloan is planning something with meal vouchers. I'm sitting with her at lunch. If you've ever wished someone had sat with you before things got ugly, come. Some said no. Some stared at me like I had grown antlers. Some asked for proof, and I showed only enough. Sloan's message, the voucher envelope, the sign-out log photo with Mrs. Alvarez's thumb covering unrelated names. Kemi said yes first. Theo shrugged and said, I was going to eat near the vending machines anyway. Jessa cried, which I had not expected, then whispered, I hated everyone for watching. Priya did not answer. But when I walked away, I saw her delete something on her phone, and I hoped that meant the old fear had cracked. Lunch began at 12:35, loud and bright, and ordinary in the cruel way disaster days often are. The cafeteria filled with bodies, voices, trays, cutlery, wrappers, perfume, steam, and the smell of tomato pasta. Sunlight poured through the skylight onto Sloan's table, making it look staged. Nora waited beside me at the entrance, gripping her tray so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "We can still go somewhere else," she whispered. I could feel the old Clara inside me begging to agree. The old Clara wanted the library steps, the bathroom stall, the safety of not making a scene. The reborn Clara had learned that hiding only gives bullies better editing control. "No," I said softly. "But you can walk away at any point. This is not a test of your courage." Nora looked at me strangely. "Then what is it?" I looked across the cafeteria. Sloane sat at the sun table with Paige, Talia, Margot, and 3 boys who laughed whenever powerful girls laughed. An empty seat had been left beside Sloane like a decorated trap. A test of theirs. We walked forward. Not to the back wall. Not to the corner. Not to the sun table either. I chose table 4, directly beneath the cafeteria camera, beside the lunch fund display box, visible from the staff table, and close enough to the serving counter that Mrs. Alvarez could hear raised voices. I sat down first. Nora sat beside me. Then Kemi arrived with her tray. Then Theo. Then Jessa. Then, after a long moment, Priya came from the sun table carrying her salad and sat across from us. The cafeteria did not go silent. It changed pitch. That was worse. Conversations bent toward us, without stopping, like wind around a building. Sloane waited exactly 90 seconds before approaching. She understood timing. Too fast looked territorial. Too slow looked weak. She came with Paige and Talia on either side, carrying a little paper bag tied with the same pale gold ribbon used by the Lunch Angels Fund. "Nora," she said, her voice bright enough to polish silver. "There you are. We saved you a proper seat." Nora looked at me, then back at Sloane. "I'm okay here." A tiny miracle. Sloane's smile warmed and sharpened at once. "Of course. Clara can be intense, but she means well." I took a bite of pasta and said nothing. Silence made her adjust. She placed the ribbon bag on the table near Nora's tray. "Welcome gift. Since first days are expensive and confusing." Nora did not touch it. Mrs. Alvarez appeared behind the serving counter, drying her hands slowly on a towel. Principal Damas sat at the staff table with a mug she was not drinking from. Sloane saw them, but she was too committed to retreat without losing face. "Open it," Paige said. "Don't be rude." Kemi's fork stopped moving. Funny thing to say about a gift with rules. Paige blinked, surprised Kemi had spoken. Sloane laughed lightly. "It's just lunch vouchers. The fund is here to help." Jess's face went white. Theo leaned back and looked directly at the camera above us. I finally spoke. "Who signed those out?" Sloane's smile paused again. "The committee. You signed out 10 yesterday." The whole table froze. Sloane's eyes flicked to my face, then to the lunch fund box, then to Mrs. Alvarez. "That's committee business." "Then why are unlogged vouchers being handed to a new student in front of half the cafeteria?" I asked. That was the moment the room began to turn, not fully, but enough to lean. Students at nearby tables stopped pretending not to listen. Sloane's voice softened. "Dangerous. Clara, this is exactly what I meant. You're making Nora feel ashamed for accepting support." In the first life, that line worked. It made any challenge to the voucher look like cruelty toward the person being framed. Today, Nora answered before I could. I didn't accept it. Her voice shook, but it carried. She put it on the table. Sloane looked at her with wounded surprise. "Nora, I'm trying to help you." "Then why did Paige tell me before lunch that people like me should be grateful for sponsored food?" The cafeteria went quieter. Paige flushed. "I was joking." Kemi laughed once, cold and sudden. "You always are after someone," repeats it clearly. That was the first crack with sound. A boy at the next table whispered, "Damn." Sloane's face tightened. "This is becoming unfair." "Good," Theo said. Everyone looked at him because Theo rarely spoke above a murmur. He pushed his glasses up and continued, "Unfair things are usually fine until they happen to the organizer." A few students laughed. Not at Nora. At Sloane's table. The direction of laughter shifted like a weather vane. Sloane heard it. Her eyes changed. Then the trap tried to spring, anyway. Talia reached toward the ribbon bag. Let's just put it away before Clara turns charity into a trial. As she lifted it, the bottom opened. Vouchers spilled across Nora's tray and onto the floor. More than 2, more than 10, a flutter of pale gold slips landing in sauce and under shoes.
Gasps.
Perfectly staged. In the first life, the vouchers fell from Nora's bag when Paige accidentally bumped her chair. The video began after the fall. The caption said "New girl robbed lunch fund, then dropped proof." Today, the fall happened on Sloane's side of the table, from a bag she brought, under a camera, while Principal DeMoss watched. Still, Sloane reacted instantly. "Nora," she gasped, "why do you have all of those?" It was almost impressive. Even when physics betrayed her, she tried to assign ownership through tone. Nora went pale. For one terrible second, I saw the old timeline reaching for her throat. Then Mrs. Alvarez moved faster than any of us. "Nobody touches them," she barked. The cafeteria froze. She came around the counter with red gloves and a plastic tray, kneeling beside the fallen vouchers. "These numbers are from yesterday's committee sign-out." She held one up. No red stamp. Not issued by Kitchen today. Principal DeMoss stood. Sloane, Paige, Talia, step away from the table. Now, the cafeteria did go silent. Real silence. Tray stopping silence. Fork halfway to mouth silence. Sun table silence. Sloane began to cry. I had known she would, but knowing did not make it less effective. Tears slid down her face beautifully, not messy, not loud, just enough to make adults remember she was still a student and students remember they had spent years being trained to comfort her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Those were in the fun bag. I was bringing them to Nora." "I didn't know. You signed them out yesterday," Mrs. Alvarez said, "for emergency distribution. None were returned." "I forgot." "You forgot 8 vouchers in a bag you brought to a new student after anonymous messages this morning said she looked like she'd need charity?"
Principal DeMoss asked.
Sloane's eyes widened. "Anonymous messages?" Nora looked at me. I nodded slightly. Principal DeMoss held up a printed screenshot. "A student sent us a message from the grade chat at 11:58. New girl's about to get the sponsor special. Hope she checks her pockets." Sloane looked toward Paige. Paige looked toward Talia. That tiny triangle of blame turned the cafeteria against them more than my words ever could. Students saw it, the way predators search for the weakest pack member when the hunt fails. Talia's face crumpled first. "Sloane said it was just a lesson," she blurted. Paige hissed, "Shut up." Too late. The cafeteria inhaled as one body. Principal DeMoss said, "A lesson in what?" Talia started crying harder. She said new girls always choose wrong if you don't show them where they belong. Something broke then, but not at the sun table. It broke everywhere else. Jessa stood, so suddenly her chair scraped backward. Like when my meal card drained at camp and everyone said I probably bought snacks for attention? Her voice shook, but anger held it upright. Kemi stood next. Like when you called my lunch, Charity Curry, and then told Miss Caro you were concerned I felt isolated? Theo lifted one hand, without standing. Like when the chess team snacks disappeared, and somehow the receipt was in my blazer. More voices followed, not organized, not polished, not kind. A year 10 girl shouted that Sloane made her pay table tax in cookies to sit near the skylight. A boy from basketball said Paige dared him to ask for lunch Angel's help, then posted the request in a group chat. Priya, across from me, stood last. Her hands trembled around her salad fork. "The sun table has a folder," she said. The cafeteria went quiet again. Sloane turned toward her slowly. "Priya." One word. A command. Priya swallowed. "They call it the menu. It has names, weaknesses, what jokes work, what food people bring, who's on bursary, who cries, who gets angry, who apologizes." Sloane's tear stopped. "You're lying." Priya looked at Principal DeMoss. "It's in the shared album. I can show you." That was the point of no return. Not the vouchers. Not the camera. The map. Bullies survive incidents. They struggle with systems. Principal Damas took Priya's phone at the staff table while the cafeteria watched in a silence, so tense it felt physical. I did not move. Nora sat beside me, breathing fast, both hands flat on the table exactly as I had taught myself to do in meetings where panic could be misread. Mrs. Alvarez collected every voucher and read the serial numbers aloud to the assistant manager, who wrote them down like a courtroom clerk. Sloane stood near the sun table with Paige and Talia, no longer glowing under the skylight, just exposed by it. Principal Damas's face changed as she scrolled. That was how the cafeteria learned the phone mattered. Adults try to hide horror from students, but horror has posture. She found the folder. She found screenshots of lunch trays, captions,
Names.
the phrase "New Girl Sponsor Special." A video from the first life?
No, not yet.
This timeline had not created it. Instead, she found drafts, planned angles, a note saying, "Clara may interfere. Make it look like scholarship jealousy if she does." My stomach dropped. Nora turned to me. "They wrote about you too?" I nodded once. Principal Damas looked up at me, and for the first time since I had known her across 2 lives, her expression held not pity, but apology before words. "Cafeteria is dismissed by year group," she said, voice like steel under velvet. "No one posts anything. Anyone who does becomes part of the investigation." Nobody moved until Mrs. Alvarez added, "Move, or tomorrow's pasta is cancelled." That worked faster than policy. By the end of lunch, the whole cafeteria had turned. Not in the dramatic, clean-way stories pretend crowds become moral all at once. Some students were angry because they had been hurt. Some were angry because they had laughed and now looked guilty. Some were excited because scandal tastes good when it is not yours. Some still defended Sloane in whispers, saying it was probably misunderstood, probably a joke, probably Clara making it bigger. But the center had shifted. Nora was no longer alone beneath a rain of vouchers. I was no longer the scholarship girl making noise. The bullies were no longer background weather. They were names attached to a folder, serial numbers, sign-out logs, planned captions, and a cafeteria full of students remembering themselves. That mattered. Principal Damas called our parents. Mrs. Alvarez locked the lunch angel's drawer and posted a handwritten sign that said, "Fund paused pending audit. Ask kitchen directly for support. No student intermediaries." I loved that sign more than most poetry. Sloane's mother arrived at 2:10 wearing pearls and outrage. Paige's father arrived at 2:22 asking whether teenage lunch drama needed formal documentation. Talia's older sister arrived because her parents were out of town, and she looked so disappointed that Talia began sobbing again before anyone spoke. My mother arrived last, still in her postal uniform, rain on her sleeves, eyes scanning my face first. "Are you hurt?" she asked. In my first life, by the time she arrived, I was already accused of stirring conflict, and she looked frightened enough to ask whether I had, maybe, misunderstood. This time, I said, "No," then Nora, beside me, whispered. She sat with me. My mother looked at her, then at me, and something in her expression softened and sharpened at once. "Good," she said. "Then we sit until they finish writing everything down." The investigation lasted 3 weeks, but the cafeteria changed by the next morning. Sloane, Paige, and Talia were suspended pending review. The sun table sat empty at first, which was eerie, like a throne room after evacuation. Then Kemi sat there, not to claim it forever, just to eat noodles under the skylight once without permission. Theo joined her. Jessa did too. By Thursday, the table had stopped belonging to anyone. That was how you knew the spell had broken. The Lunch Angels Fund audit found missing vouchers from 3 terms, irregular sign-outs, and student-created support lists that included financial status, family details, dietary habits, and humiliation notes disguised as social observations. Sloane's mother called it leadership overreach. Mrs. Alvarez called it theft with stationery. Principal Damas dissolved the student-run fund and rebuilt meal support through the kitchen office, confidentially, with no gold ribbons, no committee photos, no students deciding who deserved help. Paige transferred before the disciplinary report finalized. Talia gave a statement and stayed, quieter than before, no longer laughing on command. Sloane returned after 2 weeks only, to collect her things. She walked through the cafeteria once, chin high, eyes dry, mother beside her. People watched, but nobody moved aside quickly enough to make it feel like power. That was the new cruelty of the room for her. Ordinary space. As she passed our table, she looked at Nora, then at me. "You think they love you now?" she asked softly.
No, I said.
"I think they saw you." Her mouth tightened. "Seeing doesn't last. Records do," I replied. Mrs. Alvarez, behind a counter, stamped a stack of lunch forms so loudly it sounded like applause. Nora and I did not become instant best friends. That would have been too easy, and after 2 lives I distrusted easy things. She was quiet for days, then angry for a week, then funny in sudden flashes that caught me off guard. She told me she liked old horror movies, hated bananas, and had moved schools 3 times in 4 years, which explained why she had almost accepted Sloane's welcome like a life raft. "I thought if the popular girl picked me, I'd be safe," she said one afternoon as we sat on the library steps eating muffins Mrs. Alvarez had given us because she claimed they were too ugly to sell. I understood that so deeply it hurt. "Popular girls are sometimes safe," I said. "Just not when their kindness requires an audience." Nora looked at me. "Why did you help me before you knew me?" There was the question I could not answer fully. "Because I watched you cry once, and did nothing. Because your tray hitting the floor followed me into death. Because I needed to save you to forgive the girl I used to be." Instead, I said, "Because someone should have." She accepted that, maybe because it was true enough. Then she broke the muffin in half and handed me the bigger piece. Friendship, real friendship, often begins less like a dramatic vow and more like shared food without conditions. By the end of term, Briarfield held a student forum about bullying, which sounded like the kind of event that could become useless quickly. But something unexpected happened. Students spoke. Not perfectly. Not politely. Kemi talked about how jokes about food become jokes about families. Theo talked about how being called leftovers made him stop asking for help when his father lost work. Jessa talked about meal card shame. Priya stood in front of everyone and admitted she stayed at the sun table because she liked being safe more than she hated watching others get hurt. That honesty made some people uncomfortable, which meant it mattered. I spoke last, not because I wanted to, but because Nora squeezed my hand and whispered, "You started it." I did not tell them about rebirth. I did not tell them about dying above a bakery with regret stuck under my ribs. I told them the usable truth. A cafeteria is not just where people eat. It is where school shows who is allowed to belong without asking. If a table needs someone to be humiliated so everyone else knows the rules, the table is the problem. The room was quiet. Then Mrs. Alvarez, standing in the back with her arms folded, said, "Also, stop leaving rubbish under the chairs." Everyone laughed, and the laughter did not cut anyone. That felt like progress. Sometimes I still think about the first Nora, the one I did not sit with, the one whose first day became evidence against her. I wonder where she went after her family withdrew her, whether she found a school with safer tables, whether she learned to distrust invitations wrapped in gold ribbon, whether she ever knew one girl in the cafeteria wanted to stand but did not. That guilt did not vanish just because I saved the second Nora. Rebirth is not an eraser. It is a second pen placed in a shaking hand. You can write differently, but the first draft still exists somewhere inside you. On the last day of school, Nora and I walked into the cafeteria together. No one gasped. No one claimed a table. The sun table had been pushed slightly off-center during cleaning and never returned to its perfect place beneath the skylight. I liked it better crooked. Mrs. Alvarez had replaced the Lunch Angels display with a plain sign, "If you need lunch, ask us." No questions in public. Under it, someone had taped a smaller note in Theo's handwriting, "Food is not a popularity contest." Someone else had drawn a tiny crown crossed out beside it. Mrs. Alvarez pretended not to notice. Nora and I sat at table 4 again. Kemi joined us. Then Theo. Then Jessa. Then 3 Year 8 students we did not know. They asked if the seats were taken. Nora looked at me, smiled a little and said, "No. Sit with us." That was the ending I wanted most. Not Sloane exposed, not the folder found, not the vouchers counted, not even the cafeteria turning against the bullies by lunch. Those things mattered, but they were loud. The quieter victory was a new student asking for a chair without fear. It was a meal voucher system that no longer required humiliation. It was a table that belonged to whoever arrived hungry. Years later, when people asked why I became the teacher who stood in cafeterias instead of staff rooms, who learned students' lunch patterns, who noticed empty trays and sudden table changes and jokes that made only one child laugh, I always gave the simple answer. Lunch tells the truth. The longer answer is that once, in another life, I looked away from a girl holding a tray, and the whole room learned from my silence. In the life I kept, I sat with her. I sat early, before the joke, before the accusation, before the video, before the room decided who she was allowed to be. And by lunch, when Sloane's gold vouchers fell across the table like failed confetti, the cafeteria finally understood that bullies do not rule because everyone loves them. They rule because everyone thinks they are the only one afraid. The moment we sat together, that lie lost its chair.